Democrats have weaponized fear in the same way. We must not abandon our values or our beliefs in the U.S. Constitution. We all swore an oath in this very chamber to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, not a political party or man. Let us renew this belief while casting out those who take the unprecedented call to abolish this sacred document. The only person who has suggested abolishing the sacred document is Donald Trump. Maya.
Yep, and for his own personal gain, which is exactly what we set up this democracy to protect against. It's why we don't have a monarch. It's why we're not going to let anybody, any president, try to be one. But look, something that was so important in what Adam Kinzinger said, this issue that I really think we should go deep into, is radicalization. The truth is, the radicals have always been among us, racists, neo-Nazis, anti-Semites, people who are perfectly willing to attack Asians because there's something that Donald Trump wrongly called the China flu as an instigating point. I mean, these people, real people who fall prey, are often intentionally targeted by the organized white supremacists and neo-Nazis. And it is the permission that Donald Trump, his rhetoric and his protection, his calling on the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers to be his foot soldiers, including apparently and quite possibly on January 6th, at least that's true of his henchmen, that then the permission, the both sidesing as if the real problem was quote unquote the left and Antifa, when it was so obviously, even from his own administration, Department of Homeland Security, calling out white supremacy as the greatest terror threat on U.S. soil. And his denial of that actually empowered and mainstreamed organized violent hate. And that's fundamental to this problem. I participated in President Biden's anti-hate summit that he had a few months ago. And there was a former white supremacist who participated. And when asked, what would you do to prevent people from being, recruited into these organizations? And he said, provide health care, provide job training, make housing affordable. I mean, in other words, he was going to solving the problems that so many of us have and share. And when anyone, conservative, Democrat, progressive, Republican, I don't care what the labels are, the questions are we solving those problems? Because it's much less about radicalization. It's much more about giving permission, denying the protection of civil and human rights, and then failing to focus on the real problems that Americans have.
Well, and it's the language. I mean, the reason when we do cover the twice impeached ex-president's words, it's because the language has now created a permission structure for those who would carry out violent acts. I want to point out something else, and this may be striking to me, Ben Rhodes, because for a Republican to talk about America faltering flies in the face of the way Republicans have successfully utilized the idea of American exceptionalism for my entire sort of political career. He says this, coming home from war, I truly believe that American democracy was infallible. How could a nation that fought a civil war for the freedom of all, a nation that vanquished fascism and communism in Europe, falter? How could we stand atop Mount Everest only to decide that we prefer to fight in the mud? This is, you begin with, how do you fix the radicalization of a large segment of the American people's views and thoughts, the idea that people out there think an election was stolen when there's zero evidence that it was. Admitting you have a problem, admitting that democracy has faltered is the first step. And I wonder what you thought of that line.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting coming from a Republican like Adam Kinzinger, because the reality, Nicole, is actually the person that is usually talking about how terrible America is in the Republican Party is Donald Trump. So Donald Trump is not necessarily an exceptionalist in a conventional form, because America is exceptional to Donald Trump if he is president. And he regularly talks about American carnage and the death of America if he's not allowed to do what he wants. The reason I think it's interesting from an Adam Kinzinger, though, is looking, we went through these fights in the Obama years, we continue to go through them today. Sometimes if you try to raise issues of challenges to our democracy or issues around structural racism, you are kind of accused of running down America, or you're said to essentially not believe in the greatness and exceptional nature of America. And for someone like Adam Kinzinger to acknowledge all of these problems, right? So it wasn't just that quote. He talked about racism. He talked about the Constitution maybe being cast into the dustbin of history, this experiment that we're on. That is not something you usually hear from the Adam Kinzinger wing of the Republican Party, a willingness to look honestly at America's faults, a willingness to look at the mirror, a willingness to recognize that this is not preordained forever, that we have to do the work of saving this democracy and making it better one step at a time, each generation at a time. And I do think when people say, well, what are causes for optimism in American democracy today? And obviously we have more of them after the midterms. One of them is we know we have a problem. A lot of people know we have a problem. And it's not just Adam Kinzinger. I think people on both sides of the aisle recognize, wait a second here. This is getting way too dangerous. We've gone way too far. I think that explains what happened in the midterm elections. And so I think it is really important to repeat this. The acknowledgement of a problem is the first step towards creating solutions. And it's really good to see people like Adam Kinzinger do that. There are a lot of Republicans who talk about democracy and American leadership when they're outside of America. They need to talk about it here in this country if America is going to be the strong power for democracy that Republicans have wanted it to be in the past.